let's begin. Let's convene the December 6th Planning Commission meeting at 6:02 p.m. Let's start off with agenda amendments. If anyone has any, maybe if they have to leave early and want something moved ahead or any reason at all. Does anyone have anything? Just like to make space for that in the agenda. No? Okay. On to announcements. Sue usually always has some, so we'll start with her.
Not sure I have any. Yeah, I can think of a couple. So,
You can make some up.
Yeah,
That's what I'm not a liar. Okay.
we did have the housing workshop November 18th, which some of you were able to attend. We had about 20 people who participated. We did some polling on mobile apps or on a web browser. So I thought that was good for the type of meeting that it was. It was good to have a little interaction.
Yeah.
A similar presentation is going to be made to the select board tomorrow night. And there's actually a couple of planning department issues or items on the agenda tomorrow night at the select board. So there is the consultants are going to do an abbreviated presentation on where we are with the housing action plan. There's going to be a presentation on the final recommendations from the bike scoping study along Route 9 between Main Street and Exit 2. And then some of you might be of interest because it's in your neighborhood. There's going to be some suggestions for pedestrian improvements at the South Main Street and Canal Street crosswalk. So those will be on the select board tomorrow night. A second announcement is we're still waiting to hear on the grants that we submitted, but we did submit the bylaw modernization grant. Actually, that may have been on the date of the last planning commission meeting. So there's the two announcements I have.
Great. I'll just add in, it probably goes without saying, because you all know that our meetings are first Mondays, unless there's a holiday on the Monday, then it moves to Wednesday. But we don't have a schedule put out for next year, which is fine. It's kind of obvious what the next meeting is going to be, the first Monday of January, but
you might get it tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
we have prepared the dates, so we'll
Right.
send them out.
Okay. Great, and everyone's getting access to the Drive folder. Well, that's working pretty well for everyone. Yeah, to get prepared in time. Okay. Great. Okay, let's move on to considering the minutes of November 1st. I'll entertain a motion, then we can consider any edits or anything that need be changed.
A motion that we approve the minutes for November 1st, 2021.
All right, Gary made the motion. Is there a second? Doran seconded. Okay, any changes? Anything amiss?
I couldn't understand one of the sentences relating to cannabis. Let me pull up the minutes and I'll be specific. Well, now I'm having trouble finding it.
All right, well, you keep looking. I'll make a comment. I think maybe with this meeting's minutes, the authorship has changed. And so the new author, I think at least makes me seem very much more intelligent than I am. There's some big wording, but that's all right. It's a compliment, so I'll take it.
I'm just going to withdraw my comment. Sorry.
Okay.
I should have printed them out and noted it.
It's in the drive, Prudence, if you want.
No, I'm looking at it, but now I can't find what seemed confusing and needed to be reworded. So.
Okay. Well, she's still looking. We can wait another few seconds. Does anyone else see it?
Let's move forward. It's good.
Okay. All right. Let's. Who's in favor? Let's see if it's unanimous. We can just do it that way. If you're in favor, raise your hand.
If I could just ask a question of Prudence, is it the first thing, Prudence, the time constraints led to the tabling?
No,
Oh, okay,
it's not.
all right. That was my thought.
Thanks, though. Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
So 4 of us were in favor. What about you, Dan? How do you feel about these minutes?
Sure.
Support? Okay, it's unanimous. Great. Okay, let's move on to the, ooh, and we're 7 minutes ahead. The one about the solar discussion of an RTM article to stabilize the municipal tax of specific solar and other renewable energy plants with a potential motion. So I will definitely give some background about this. If you guys will recall last meeting when we were talking about the recommendations section in the preferred solar siting subcommittees document that they gave to us, that the subcommittee gave to us, I mentioned one of the things that the recommendations contains, which was to consider the state allows municipalities to reduce or exempt or stabilize different, or all of the above, the municipal portion of property taxes for renewable energy plants. And solar is the most relevant one. And so at that meeting, when I brought that one up and we talked about a couple others, I didn't think at the time that I was gonna like draft something quickly about that. But then after the meeting, some days passed, and because of the RTM steering committee I'm on, I started realizing, oh, there's kind of these dates that are good to, that are coming up soon, like in the month of December, which are ideal, you know, if not sooner, to get proposals to the select board. So I thought, I guess I should get on this and see if it's viable. So I drafted this document, and so what it does is, in order for that municipal tax reduction to happen, the select board of a town has to put it on the town meeting warning. And we're going to do it on the representative town meeting warning. So that's on March 19th. So this document proposes to the select board and so it's right out of statute. Sue set up a meeting with the assistant town manager, Patrick Moreland, and the town attorney, Bob Fisher. And the attorney drafted pretty much that language there in recommendation number 1. And then, and so that references a statute that allows for a tax stabilization program to be developed in a town for alternate energy generating plants. And then, so going along, and then, so recommendation number 2, the point of that recommendation is to highlight this memorandum's preference or priority in not just making that program apply to all renewable energy plants, broad brush, but to try to do what some would interpret that preferred siting program at the state level does, which is steer renewable energy, or at least solar development, to be on disturbed and already developed sites. So once again, through that process, you know, all these other possibilities came up, either were discovered or thought of, about how to kind of, how do I say it, like in some cases to further incentivize renewable, but more specifically to maybe also, you know, incentivize and steer it towards those developed and disturbed sites. So after the recommendation section there's the clarification section, which kind of describes more about those recommendations, goes into more detail, and it borrows from, you all will probably, this will be familiar to you, those 9 criteria from the PUC, rule 5.103. I just felt like those were good enough, and it's kind of already a precedent, although, you know, a totally different program, but it's about renewable and specifically solar most often. And so I borrowed that, but I changed number 7 a bit. You can see in the italics below the, you know, the default language of number 7, I wrote that because that's the number that, as you all will, you know, no doubt remember, allows for municipalities to basically allow whatever they deem worthy to be a preferred site. So in the spirit of this, the whole point of this memo, which is to incentivize already solar to be on already developed and disturbed sites, that the italics give a caveat to number 7, which is, yes, solar that goes through this process or that could be deemed as, that doesn't fit criterias 1 through 6 and 8 through 9, could also comply with, or could also be eligible for this tax stabilization program if it's on a legitimate, already just developed or disturbed site, such as in a power line right of way, or you know, on a place that permanently needs to be mowed of woody plant growth, like a cemetery. So it once again allows for some flexibility, but not to the same degree of flexibility as the just open-ended as the preferred site does. And then below that, it gets to the actual rationale section. So in some ways, you know, this memo is kind of backwards to how I would write things sometimes, but I think also when you know, the select board seeing a document, they want to see what's actually being recommended, and in the very first place. So the rationale speaks about you know, how green, you know, the need, if we're going to meet all of our targets, the need for more renewable energy, but then also how developing it on green fields just persistently keeps being cheaper than on developed and disturbed sites. So once again, here's this incentive that we could enact and develop. And then there is some goals and policies of actions of our town plan that seem to align with this. And then at the end, a projected budgetary impact, which is that if, as the memo reads, if that's how assuming the select board puts this on the RTM warning, and then the RTM body approves it, and then the select board and the town administration create a program with this criteria as written in the memo, then, and they, you know, develop other details too. You can look at the farmland tax stabilization program as like an analogy. But if they do all of that, then the only impact it would currently have is on one of the 6 over 50 kilowatt solar, because under 50 kilowatt, if it's, you know, there's other details too, is already automatically exempt from municipal tax. But if, anyway, just one of the 6 would be, which is the solar, the landfill. And so, you know, the town administration posed a little concern about that, but we could, you know, potentially remove, or the select board or town administration could potentially remove the landfill criteria from the program when they make it. But then also any future solar, you know, potentially this program would help development that may not possibly pencil out as things are on rooftops and parking lots with this municipal tax exemption or, you know, reduction. It may lead to these programs penciling out a little bit better, you know, and be more likely. And then those new developments then would be exempt or reduced to whatever extent, you know, the program ends up being developed for municipal tax. So it's pretty long-winded. If you guys read all of it, I didn't need to say all that, but I just started talking. So, and so I presented this. I thought that this would be most effective if the 2 other really relevant town commissions or boards also sign off on it to show kind of broad support to the select board. And so I brought it to the Conservation Commission on November 23rd, and they had a couple little, a few suggestions and edits. And so I incorporated those into the draft that you see now. And then, you know, they approved of it unanimously. So I'm hoping I can get support from the planning, or this document, sorry, it's not me, but this document here can get support from the planning commission. And then, and we can, make changes too, but as this document changes more and more, it potentially risks losing the Conservation Commission support, but we're also, regardless, we're going to send it, share it with them, the Conservation Commission, before it officially goes to the select board, just to ensure that they still support the final draft. So I think that's all I have to say on that right now. Does anyone have input or confusion or questions or suggestions or anything at all?
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
Dan.
So could you kind of summarize the reactions or the pluses and minuses that the Conservation Commission discussed?
Yep. Why is this? Oh yeah, you have a different thing. What did they say? Let's see. Earlier on, I had, so there were, Sue, you can correct me because you were there as well. But I felt like there was no, my memory is that there was no general, dissatisfaction with the memo. There was smaller points brought up. I had a paragraph at one point, and it's removed in the version you see, where I presented kind of like an option B to the select board and town administration, where I said, basically, like, it was a reflection of the fact that if this was implemented as written, then the town would get about $70,000 less because of the landfill solar site on Old Ferry Road. And so I wrote, to not affect the current tax base at all, perhaps just reduce the criteria just to rooftops and parking lots. But the Conservation Commission, one or two people said like that they didn't think it was effective to kind of negotiate against yourself from the outset. So I thought, yeah, I think throughout this whole process, at least I will attend, and and staff will, Sue and Steve will kind of, I think, understand and represent the point of this document. And if the select board doesn't want to implement it, 100% as written here, we'll say like, well, hey, it's not an all or nothing thing. We can back down and be a little less broad brush. The italics that I put under criteria 7, that was its own paragraph, and a couple of people were saying how they didn't really, it was somewhere else in the document and they found it kind of confusing where it was. So I moved it right underneath 7 to show. So I think that makes that clearer. And then the budgetary impact paragraph or section, actually at the very end, I didn't even have that. And a person or two expressed that it would be good to lay that all out right from the outset. I think those are the major changes that were made.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If I could just say, I think it's great that you're obviously integrating and participating with the Conservation Commission on this. It was apparent, obviously, at the last meeting, that where we had the carbon sequestration discussion and all that. I guess is this a planning commission recommendation, or is this a joint thing with the Conservation Commission? Or I'm just not sure what the sort of the packaging
Right.
of.
Yep. Yeah, I think, no, the document, I think, will look, accepting any more edits that get made, it will look exactly like it is here.
But
And, the memo
Right.
is from the Planning Commission, the conservation, it's a joint thing.
and the
And,
Energy Committee, yeah.
yeah, and the Energy Committee. And I mean, I would expect that I may end up being the voice of it. I don't know, or maybe I won't show up sometimes and I'll put that on Sue.
No, I'm not
okay.
presenting this.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Gotcha.
it's a joint thing, but maybe, you know, I don't know if we should say it anywhere, but it's like kind of more from us, the planning commission, than the others, because it's kind of pulled out of the recommendations that our subcommittee gave us, but I don't know, maybe different
And-
ways of looking at it.
Is the subcommittee still going to be active, Tom?
No,
The,
no, that's all.
that's done, right?
So that's dissolved. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it gave us a document and then it's dissolved.
This is part of
So-
agricultural too, Tom?
I didn't think to add agriculture because I don't know how much it doesn't seem so much their purview to me.
Well, it is
as
one of
other
the-
two.
It is in there, you know, I mean,
Yeah, this right here, agricultural survival, ensures viability of agriculture for.
Oh, as far as in the goals,
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't know if agriculture was a part of.
It does, yeah. Well, I mean, and I suppose this would, because often green fields, whether that's forest or field or prime ag land, is less expensive than on developed sites. Yeah, I mean, it's possible, you know, to be honest, I'm not sure if we would get their signature or their approval. Because I hear the thing of how, you know, agriculture often views, or farms often view solar as an asset to keep themselves more viable as a farm, but, you know.
No,
So I'm not sure how much they would support this, to be honest. And so, you know, so one could argue like, all right, let's not ask them, or one could argue, all right, we should talk with them. But
Yeah, I was looking at the forestry part now, wouldn't that be tree advisory or the?
No.
Handles that as well, no? Oh, good.
Prudence has a question.
oh, yeah, prudence.
Okay.
This isn't really so much to the merit of what you're suggesting, Tom, but I've been a town meeting rep for most of a lot of, you know, a long time, almost every year. And this is this is going to be new. I don't remember much of a discussion that, and I'm afraid that it could be confusing. I mean, the discussion at our last meeting was somewhat dense and, you know, it's a big body, and I just worry that it could take, you know, it could take the body a long time to really understand it.
Right.
But that's not, you know.
No, yeah, and you may be right. I will say that, you know, the statute that enables the possibility of this, you know, alternate energy generating plant tax stabilization program is the same statute that enables some programs that we already have, the farmland program, the commercial and industrial, you know, tax stabilization program. So, I mean, we already have this, and it's already gone to town meeting in years past. I don't know which years, but for those other things. And, you know, what town meeting will actually see is just the wording in recommendation number 1. You know, this whole document could be provided to them, or a different version of it before the meeting as background. But yeah, I mean, a lot of things end up being very long discussions at representative town meeting. You're right. I don't know.
And I guess you'd like to be proactive and have any potential developers realize that there's tax incentives for
Right.
building arrays on already disturbed properties or built. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's
that
to
seems
provide
fair.
an incentive to develop it in the places we want it developed.
Yeah, exactly. Which hopefully will tip the balance, or at least get closer to tipping the balance to make that the easier places to develop than green fields. Right. Or, you know, less costly. Does this seem like something people want to support? Is there anything I left out compared to when I presented at the Conservation Commission meeting?
No, I guess, well, it's not been on the Energy Committee's agenda yet.
Right.
They haven't met yet, so.
Can I ask a question, Tom? This is just a timing sort of concern. At the end there, you have actions, right? Your 12.1.1 and 12.1.2 there. Second to last, I guess, from the budgetary impact. It seems like we're doing a lot of land use planning discussions already, and I'm actually curious how this fits into, like tonight. I think we're going to talk about some land use issues, and is I know that obviously you guys have done a lot of work on ferreting out the issues, and this is one of them. But is this, I'm just not really clear on, so as you said, those other, what are they called? Tax stabilization agreements that with other issues, they came about for a reason probably similar to the previous issues that you've had with siting of solar. I guess I'm wondering how, like, as Prudence was saying, how people would react to this being singled out versus the potential for integrating this, as sort of a larger land use discussion, which includes agriculture, for example, and it includes a lot of other things already. Just a question, really. I'm not trying to throw a roadblock in the way. I really, because when you have your action steps there, maintain consistency with the future land use plan, and so forth. If I were seeing that, I would think, well, okay, why isn't this just part of the land use plan? I guess,
I guess when I added those goals, policies, and actions from the town plan, I had seen that in some other memos that maybe staff had presented. I think it was for one of the municipal planning grants.
Yeah.
And staff, kind of, I guess the thought is to make the argument to the right, because the town plan is like the supposedly the like, not foundational, but like the kind of the guiding document for the town, which all policies and actions for the most part should follow from. So with that, I think I just went through all the goals, policies, and actions, at the beginning of each of the chapters in the plan, and pulled the ones that seem to show that enacting this, it's not law, but in enacting or implementing this, the memorandum's recommendations supports some of the goals and policies and actions. And as far as that one, maintaining zoning districts consistent with the future land use plan adopted as part of this chapter, yeah, I would say that one may not be the most
Relevant.
the most relevant one, but it seemed to have a little relevance because solar is a type of development. It's not forest, it's not ag land, and so and we have our future land use plan shows like where development should be and where it shouldn't be, and so, and where the most compact development should be. And so implementing this would put development on top of development. So, instead of putting it, it would incentivize it to be there instead of more so than the current situation, which is sometimes the solar form of development happening on green fields. So that to me seems to support the future land use plan, but maybe it's a stretch.
I was saying it does fit. It just seems like also it's sort of like, are we already doing this? That might be a question that people could ask, I suppose. Not the tax part, but just, are we already working toward sensible land use planning that includes this kind of thing. But
Right. Yeah, I suppose we are. Yeah. And the action literally says maintain zoning districts consistent, and this has nothing to do with zoning districts. So how about we strike that one out? I mean, it makes sense to me. It's, and you brought attention to it. I was just trying to
Mhm.
defend it, but I mean, it seems, you're right. It's at best a stretch in the sense of helping this.
So the main action then, right, so the main thing would be supporting property owners and developers.
Right.
That
Yeah.
second. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, potentially this memorandum could, could get implemented, like in order for things to happen at the town level, they don't necessarily need to always have goals, policies, and actions from the town plan that they can fly high and say, like, look, it's supported by the town plan. But it seems, what I've noticed is that it seems to give more validity or integrity to proposals and propositions. So. Yeah, so basically what this is doing is, discuss it, just taking some measure that the state allows towns to do to help renewable energy. And that's recommendation number one. And then recommendation number two is just saying, when and if this passes by RTM, let's do it in a way that is not broad brush, but a little more judicious. So
Tom,
I'll stop. And
can I ask a detailed question here, Tom? I'm sorry
oh,
to,
please.
but I think I glossed over this before. But there's a strike through. I'm just not sure if it's meant to be in there or not. The number.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. And that's because, those borrowed criteria and those copy and pasted criteria from the PUC 1 through 9.
Right.
Since I was referencing it, I wanted to leave it intact. But as you see underneath 7, I added the italics, and in 9, I crossed that part out because it just seems, it doesn't seem, we have sites in town where, yes, one lot is developed, it's a big building, it's a parking lot, but then the site right next to it, is maybe, a nice mature forest, or has, deer wintering yards, or has all sorts of other, or prime ag land. So just because it's next to the parcel, I understand why they put that in there, because it's better than the renewable energy being somewhere farther out. So it is clustering to some degree, but when I drafted this, I felt like being a little stricter than their rules across. I mean, one could argue number 9 should maybe be removed entirely, because even on the same big parcel, sometimes, a parcel can be 500 acres, and one part can have a parking lot and big building, and then 1,000 feet away, there can once again be, a rare or mature forest or something. But I don't know. I didn't want to.
Well,
I don't know.
Infrastructure, let's say you don't have a meter on that empty lot, but you do on the adjacent lot. I mean, it might be useful if I hear what you're saying though. So but that's not a condition, right? That could be something that on a case by case. I mean, obviously if it's a scenario like you said, then it would be silly, but if you had some situation where the adjacent lot might be a prime candidate, where let's say there's groundwater contamination that affects both, it looks pristine from up above, but it really underground, it's a super fun site or whatever. That could be handled on a case by case basis, I guess.
I suppose so. I mean, I think it depends on what the actual wording of the final tax stabilization program will be if it gets implemented. If the program decides to, pull this definition of already developed and disturbed site as the set in stone criteria, then I guess it won't be case by case. But if they you know, if town administration and the select board choose to, you know, totally do something else after RTM, you know, or to modify this or to give it more flexibility, then then that would be how it goes. So.
Gotcha.
What do you think, Gary?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, there's more to that, I guess, down the road, we're gonna be
Right.
investigating, looking into what new things are gonna be coming out next year. So there might be some omissions and additions, as they say,
Mhm,
but it's a work in progress.
mhm,
You know, I think it's something we can go ahead, and go forward with. And do.
mhm.
I just was wondering about the agricultural part. That was the only thing.
Yeah.
Still trying to wrap around that concept.
One of you staffs the agricultural commission, right?
Stephen does?
Oh, Stephen does. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
sometimes I do, but we've kind of been
Mhm.
passing the baton.
When's their, do you know when their meetings are?
Supposed to be Friday.
Oh.
I need to check in with Stephen. I haven't seen an agenda yet.
Uh-huh.
I could talk with Stephen in
Sure.
the morning if and see. I mean, he has to speak to the chair and
Right.
figure out.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing for me is, you know, this to me seems like an action that is relevant to like good judicious land use,
Mhm.
right? And efficient and compact land use. And I put the Conservation Commission on here because they want, you know, just to put their mission very simply and maybe from an outsider's perspective, they have a priority of conserving natural areas, let's just say. The energy conservation, and so I think they would like the judiciousness of this. And the Energy Committee wants, once again, to be too simple, but and from a layman's outsider's perspective, they want to promote energy and renewable energy, I think, in this town.
Mhm.
So I think they would support a new incentive for solar. But yeah, the Ag Committee, I don't know which way they would go. And
Yeah,
and if they say, I mean, you might think, okay, good, this keeps development out of off prime ag land and stuff. But once again, like I've said, I've often seen, you know, the farming community say that, you know, that solar on farmland should be considered, you know, at the most utmost get the most utmost benefits and rewards in line with any others. So they may not support at least recommendation number 2 part of this. So yeah, I mean, if they don't support this, I mean, they can, we could not, this could not go to them, and they, of course, like anyone else, can feel free to chime in at the select board meeting. Or if it does go to them and they support it, well, that'd be great. But I mean, what if they don't? Do I just leave it out, or do I add a note to do I bring it up when I present this? If I do present this to the select board meeting and say they didn't support it,
You would just leave it out.
Just leave it
and
out,
If you were
yeah.
asked, you would say they didn't support it.
right?
Okay.
Okay, I mean, well, can we get this on the meeting for Friday, do you think?
I don't know.
Oh, yes,
But we
Stephen,
can
yeah.
try.
Okay, so we'll try.
I got one last question.
Sure.
Like Columbo, part of the transportation accessibility promotes transportation. It's like, expound on that just a little.
Sure. Well, I just left so Gary's talking about the last goal, town plan goal, and the second to last clause about promoting transportation accessibility. I just kept the whole quote in full.
Okay.
I didn't, you know, obviously I pulled these out of the whole town plan, but I didn't, you know, cut off sentences and stuff. So the part that's relevant there is, you know, mostly ensures the viability of agricultural and forest economies. Well, when you look at that, and based off what I said, and if putting solar on farms, you know, ensures the viability, it depends on how you interpret ensuring the viability of agricultural economies. But anyway, protecting natural resources and reinforcing a compact development pattern, it definitely supports those two parts. Well, then safety against floods, you could say if you put impervious surface, solar panels over what used to be, a forest, then, that contributes to a little bit of runoff.
I will chop this in.
Okay.
Not a question.
Yep, Prudence.
I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with the planning commission weighing in on the tax issue, but maybe that's just one of the, I shouldn't be, that's a tool in our toolbox to encourage good development. I mean, I haven't been on the commission for a super long time, but it's different than, it's just, it's just a little different issue than I'm
Sure.
used to talking about here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess I would agree with that.
Well, can I ask a question too? So the other tax stabilization examples you mentioned, where did they originate? Do you happen to know the history of some of those?
I don't, maybe Sue, no.
I don't.
I think it was
don't.
decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the history of either of them. I could probably guess about the farmland tax stabilization, but yeah. I don't know, Prudence, if you recall them being in any RTMs that you were at.
I don't, but that doesn't mean they weren't.
I feel
The typical things we do is renew, the little league field comes up every 5 years and.
Yeah, what I can say that, both of those programs have terms to it. So I think for the farmland one, it might be a 3-year tax stabilization, and you need to be sending in financial documents. You need to make such and so much money out of farming that meets the state's definition. And then I think, and they are 100% stabilized for the municipal portion of the tax. They still have to pay the school portion. The program before they did before they changed the way they funded the schools, it was a 50% stabilization of municipal tax and 50% stabilization of the school portion. But because the state gives the school assessment, now it's 100% stabilization on the municipal rate. And then the commercial and industrial, those I think are more negotiated. They, you might be stabilized for a certain number of years at a certain rate, and then it starts, increasing so that, maybe within X number of years, you're paying the full tax. So, what a tax stabilization program for alternate energy generating plants looks like, I don't really know. It could be anywhere. It could be one of the two of those, or maybe there's some other way to do it.
So
Yeah, and this memo doesn't speak to that at all. It would just leave it up to the program, writers and implementers to figure out. Yeah, Dan?
I know this is probably a complicated answer, but so Sue, in the example you're giving with commercial, when if there's a point where the tax goes to full tax, does that change over when there's a new owner? Is there a new negotiation every time there's a new owner, or is that sort of like a life of the project sort of thing? I don't know.
I don't know, Dan. I don't know off the top of my head.
Curious, yeah.
I can get back to you on that. It's not a program that's run out of our office, and
Yeah. Okay.
so I'm not.
But this would obviously be an incentive for the developer for the solar.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a good question though, too, because if, this does come into being, it's something to consider, if it gets sold, maybe that stabilization doesn't pass on.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. Yeah.
I know with the farmland, that's not the case. You could sell the farm and it doesn't run with the land, it runs with the owners. My guess is the commercial industrial is the same. with the option that the new person could come in and negotiate, apply and
Right.
get a tax stabilization contract.
Prudence, about your comment earlier, I think I said that, I haven't seen the planning commission do anything like this yet. But at least peripherally, the statute allows, definitely says that the planning commissions can deal with topics of renewable energy, right? It's not just land use and planning, we can do transportation and renewable energy and some other things. And in that list of powers and duties, it says, I don't have this in front of me and I haven't looked at it in a while, but there is one power and duty, which we definitely haven't done since I've been a commissioner, but has something to do with like creating a budget, like the actual town budget or something like that, or a capital plan.
Usually,
And we haven't,
usually it's not.
and
yeah,
that's not what
capital
this is,
improvement
but it
program. Yeah.
has to do with money is all I'm saying.
Yeah, it could be the timing of projects.
Oh.
When I worked for
okay.
municipality in New Hampshire, the planning board there was involved in capital improvement planning,
Oh.
project planning and
I see. It's
laying
just-
it out and,
Oh, okay.
that kind of thing.
Okay, so scratch that, but, yeah, and I mean, last 2 summers ago, we crafted that letter to this, that kind of recommendation to the select board about COVID, how to address COVID measures in terms of like helping downtown businesses. That was kind of far out, but it seems that we should do what we can at that important time. So right now we have a pandemic of fossil fuel energy that we have to get rid of. No, well, I'm not gonna, if someone can make a motion, then we could vote on this and see which way it goes. But what are people thinking? Because I'd like not to. We have other agenda items to get to.
Oh,
anyway.
Doran had something to say.
Sorry, just for now.
Oh,
And then Dan.
Just
oh,
to-
Doran.
you know-
Oh, Dan, okay.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't, I feel well out of my depth in terms of being able to say, yeah, we should throw our names, support this or not, in terms of the sort of the depth and the magnitude. So I guess that's kind of, I just read through the document, a couple times and I'm still sort of, I don't know. I don't honestly know what is best in terms of supporting or not.
Mhm.
Yeah, just
Dan?
to, if I may, this kind of I'm not saying this is the way to go, but is this something that the Conservation Commission and the Energy Committee and let's say one or the other or both of them could possibly promote themselves, or do they need the Planning Commission behind it? Is that the sense of this, or is it, I mean, I understand you've been involved with it, Tom, nothing, but is it viable, or is it more viable with Planning Commission's involvement, or is it still viable if it were only the Energy Committee, let's say, or 2 out of 3?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You'd have to be tapped into the brains of our current select board members to know that.
No, I don't mean viable as far as getting, I just mean, if we don't agree to this, then it doesn't die, right? I think it could continue on with the Conservation Commission, or is this really at its core, is this a Planning Commission thing?
I mean, I would say that in one sense, any one or any town committee can write memos and make recommendations to the select board whenever they want, with whoever they want, also authored, or as a joint letter. But I think the select board and, town manager and whoever else staffs the select board meetings will know maybe where this came from. And then the fact that, maybe if it didn't have, yeah. I mean, I don't think but Sue, please.
I would say it can come from any of these boards. It can come from anybody in the public. Like what's happening here is an attempt to get the select board to put something on the RTM article. The other way to get an article on RTM is to get signatures. This is asking the select board to directly put it on. As far as moving forward, with it as a proposal from the Conservation Commission, that really wasn't their discussion. They were reacting to this proposal that they were
Right.
being asked to support. So I wouldn't say if this dies here or it dies at the Energy Committee, I think they'd want to have that discussion again. Do we want to put this proposal forward? And without putting words in Tom's mouth, but the way he and I spoke about it was, this was in the recommendations from the solar siting. So, which was a subcommittee organized by the Planning Commission. So, I think in Tom's mind, correct me if I'm wrong, the Planning Commission kind of bringing it forth. And then the idea was to, get support from some of the other committees. So.
Right, yeah, well said. I agree.
So this was something in the making for a while when you drafted this.
Well, not this document, just the little blurb, the little kind of one sentence thing in the recommendations from the solar
Gotcha.
subcommittee. Yeah. And then I thought, well, with town meeting coming up and the select board considering articles to put on it, I'll take the one recommendation, which I think is a good one, and actually flesh it out into a memo to the select board. So.
Team, any questions, team?
Well, I want to address Doran's. Doran, what do you think? What's the solution? Because I don't. Do you have questions that need to be answered, or if we put this off a month, is that still possible for the select board to consider, Sue?
It's getting tight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Yep, Doran.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't know. I mean, because, off of what we did with the, I guess, I felt relatively more confident. It's true that this was like recommendations that were asked for coming off of the work we did with the solar panel mission. But I guess, I still just don't know. I mean, like it could still move forward, and you could see what type of discussion would come around it. Like maybe it's worthwhile to move forward and say that, to bring it to greater discussion. I don't know. Maybe even with some more research, I don't know if I would still know, added on to the work we've done. But yeah, I guess that's all I was saying.
Right. I mean, this would still have to be implemented by, filtered through the select board, then filtered through RTM, and then filtered through, if they approve it, the actual fleshing out of the details of the program. So, there's a lot more to come after this, if this was to move forward. But yeah, Dan.
Yeah, the sticking point for me, and I don't know enough about it really, but it seems to me that if the conversation could be had with the agricultural committee, a lot could be learned. Possibly there could be a good conversation that comes out of it, for one thing. And besides that, I'm just, if this is sort of doomed, to having that discussion anyway, why not have it up front? You know what I mean? Like, so I would feel a little bit more comfortable if that conversation could happen with the ag committee, just because it seems like a pretty important piece. And not even the question of would they sign on to this, but ask them what they think about it and maybe get some feedback or something, or if they want to sign on to it or some form of it. It just sounds like, it sounds a little less savvy to go about it in the let's try to do this without, I mean, I understand the concern, but it could be a learning experience rather than a sort of confrontational, one. I don't know anything about what would happen, or what the composition of that committee is or anything, but about it. But seems to me it might be worth doing rather than us go ahead right now,
Mhm.
if that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see the prudence of, getting as much input from varied groups as possible.
I don't want to speak for the Agricultural Advisory Committee, and I don't know what the agenda for Friday looks like, and if Stephen and the chair have consulted. What I would say is I don't know that they'll see this one coming. I don't know how much the chair participated on the solar siting subcommittee.
Yeah.
And honestly, they're preparing their own article for RTM. So and it has to do with a repurposing of the Ag Land Protection Fund. So I don't know what kind of room they'll be on the agenda, and this is kind of coming to them cold. It's not like they've been involved all along. But I don't know that that's necessarily fatal either. I mean, they've got a tax stabilization program for the farms that is supposed to help with their viability. They could support this, or they could just be hesitant just because it's coming cold to them.
Mhm.
But did I understand you correctly? The chair of the Ag Committee was on the solar siting subcommittee? Is that right?
That was, she was chair at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was on it. She got busy. The committee's formed in like February or something, and then a couple months later, that ag member joined and attended for a couple meetings. So then I think it was just the
season.
busyness of the season, being a farmer and a very ambitious farmer at that, led to, not really participating for the last 6 months, five months or so. So,
But this might be the way
it's still kind of out of the loop, is what I'm saying.
but it might be a way to close the loop as far as, hey, this is what we've come up with, or where this is going. I don't know. But I'll leave it up to you. I would just, it would be nice, even if it's not possible at this week's meeting, and there's still time. It wouldn't be likely that they have a meeting before. I'm sorry, when are these due to the select board?
So I think that the warning needs to be, I'm not sure the exact date, but I think it's like somewhere around January 25th, the warning needs to be set. They meet the 1st and 3rd Tuesdays of the month. I'm not really sure if we put this off to January. Our next meeting would be January 3rd. We definitely wouldn't be on the January 4th meeting, which would leave it to January 18th if we can get it on. I mean, it's really, getting it wrapped up in December gives them an opportunity to get it on later in December or on that first January meeting. I can't really speak to their scheduling and when they would put it on though, either. I would say the sooner rather than later is the best.
We'll be able to hold a special meeting.
I suppose we could.
It's a tough time to hold a special meeting, but
That's true.
if you all agreed, we could warn it.
I mean, yeah,
I would say,
that's why I said the urgency is there. I mean,
I understand it's urgent, but I mean, that whole matrix of urgent, important, urgent, and these combinations. I'm not sure timing wise that it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure it's very important for next calendar year. But if it didn't get on, if it didn't go through for RTM, then it still could happen next year, I guess. I don't know. I mean,
Sure, no, it certainly could. There's no, unless the state statute gets eliminated, which has been there for decades, you know, we can do this any year, but
The cycle through, that's, you get the cycle through now. That's a hard point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Decision.
So, sorry, and this is not necessarily tied to the solar. So you might have said that to the work we did with the solar committee in terms of like this is an add-on, correct?
Yes,
yeah, it's an add-on. I mean, the only connection that this has to that is that in one of those paragraphs in the rationale, it kind of describes where this came out of.
Yep.
It gives some background.
Yep.
You know, kind of show why this is coming up, you know, potentially going to be in front of the select board at this point in time, because it's just a kind of natural progression of the work of that subcommittee. Well, yeah, definitely. You know, I hear some of the concerns about, you know, this is kind of something new for the plan. You know, planning commission hasn't weighed in on tax stuff before, and that, you know, we should flesh it out more. And sorry, Dan, your hand is up.
Well, no, I'm thinking this kind of begs a case study, and it's almost like you want another case to come along similar to the one that you had before, where you have these types of concerns, where you could, you know, test out some of the, obviously you want this in place before that happens, but you know, you don't want to rush into this either. You know what I mean? It sounds to me, I mean, at least I think, if that makes sense. You know, you had a case that came before you that sort of didn't fit ideal criteria, and this is at least an outgrowth of that discussion, right? And let's just say that another solar developer comes into town and says, hey, I want to develop a brownfield, you know, no tax incentive required, but hey, you know, I want to, you know, let's negotiate whatever, there's some deal to be made or whatever. That sounds to me like a good opportunity to have this discussion, you know, or even if it's someone else who comes in and wants to do something similar to what was done before, you say to them, hey, maybe there are other alternatives. Have you thought about this piece, you know, this, whatever it is, you know, not that you'd be the one in the position to make that, you know, have that discussion, but it seems like we might be putting, I know this is a cliche, but we might be putting the cart before the horse. I'm just saying. And I don't know if that's really appropriate analogy wise, but do you know what I mean? That's more my concern.
I'll take a stab. Not sure if I fully comprehended the main concern, but
well, if you had another case where, you know, I mean, ideally a developer is going to want to get, obviously they want to get the best deal, but they're going to follow the path of least resistance for whatever site choice they're making. And I don't know the details of that last situation, but it seems to me that, you know, a sort of tax incentive issues are, you know, potentially rife with all kinds of problems, I guess is what I'm getting at. And that if you have, you know, and if you have the right developer who comes along, you don't need to have this kind of, you know, program in place. But then again,
right.
it's obviously worthwhile to have in place. I'm not saying that, but since it's not, and it feels to me like we're rushing into it a little bit. Although I know you've been dealing with it for the better part of a year, you know, it's not a rush for you, but that might be the way it's seen.
Hmm.
And I'm not
So-
trying to make a cogent argument. There's nothing to really understand. I'm just sort of mentioning a few things for food for thought, you know. No need. Yeah, no need to,
So,
nothing to.
so if I bring this to the ag committee and get their input on it, besides that, like what needs to be done for us to feel individually more more solid in either, you know, our support or disapproval of it. You know, because I definitely hear you guys about it. You know, here it is just kind of out of the blue for especially, you know, 2 or 3 of you. But yeah, I guess besides giving it to the ag committee, like what else needs to be, you know, figured out in order for it to seem more concrete in your minds? Yes, Prudence.
I also feel out of my depth on this. I don't understand the demand. I don't understand tax stabilization. And do they typically come to RTM? You know, I know they're a negotiation. Couldn't that get negotiated when a developer appears? I just don't know enough about the pros and cons of approaching it. So I would have to abstain if there was a motion on this tonight. And you know, and I don't know where it fits in the priorities for the planning commission. It's kind of complicated, you know. I have a number of questions. I just don't know how much time we really, you know, maybe we could
Right,
talk
yeah.
offline a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe part of it is because I've been thinking about this peripherally, like Dan brought up, you know, for months as part of the subcommittee, but also I guess, you know, I'm understanding your perspective that this can be more complicated, a complicated thing, but to me, I mean, it also doesn't it doesn't seem complicated, right? I mean, like all the details are to be figured out by, you know, the town administration and select board who write the program and implement it. And you know, we already have this for farmland and for commercial and industrial, presumably because, you know, in the first case, you know, farmland was a valued thing that we wanted to preserve and or have more of, and commercial and industrial was, you know, also valued. So then, you know, appropriate programs were created. But we got, you know, I'll stop. It sounds like shouldn't even make the motion. Well, I don't know. Yeah,
Well,
we should just
just
move on to the next item. But
Yeah, I think we
what's
put
that,
this.
Gary?
Well, no, I was gonna say, yeah, definitely bring it to the other committees. I definitely think it's not, well, yeah, it's worth like kind of doing a little bit of kind of investigation work around it and just see what, see what they say. I'd definitely be curious to hear back from them on that.
Okay. All right, I'll bring it to ag, and that's this Friday, or I'll try to. We'll talk to
We'll try
Stephen
to.
Dodson, and then the energy committee is
Next Monday.
next Monday, right? The 14th, no, the 13th. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, and we'll report back. Great. Next item, continuing with the commercial cannabis stuff. So I think Steve, right? You're gonna continue kind of where you left off last month.
Do we have a presentation? Yeah.
I had put together just the typology of different storefronts.
Right.
I don't know if we wanted to even go through that.
Do you want to go through that?
I'm happy to skim through it if folks are wanting to see it. That was from November.
Yeah. I forgot about this one. I'm sorry.
Is that what this is right now? No, just PUD.
That's the last.
That's the
one.
last
Oh,
one.
so, okay.
We're gonna have to do it this way. That's okay.
Oh, as a PDF.
Yeah, it's a PDF.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I should probably share my screen. I don't know. Can you guys see that? Probably not. Okay. Good. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Do you wanna?
Sure. So, well, first, how much time do we have that we want to dedicate to this particular
Right.
business?
Oh, yeah, and so we're half an hour behind. Are people okay with going to 8:30? And I know, unfortunately, I think we did that a couple months ago, but we're a half hour behind. And if we want to, do this commercial cannabis thing justice and then start moving on the infill housing study, that's pretty much gonna push us to 8:30.
I just may have to jump out about 15 minutes early, but I can go a little bit over. That's fine to me.
Okay. So you'll miss the PUD thing, maybe.
We could also move, I don't think the PUD is
Yeah.
critical. We could
Yeah,
move
we
that
can
till
get rid of the
January.
PUD. So.
It's also entirely fine if we want to table this particular presentation again and talk about the more specific state level guidance that's happened since the last meeting.
I would prefer that.
Okay.
I read all this and it's interesting. You did a lot of work, but I don't need it presented to me. I'd rather be able to talk some specifics and
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, you did a really good job, Steve and Sue, with this memo and everything.
That was
Yeah.
all Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Steve, do you want to explain it? Do you want me to jump in on this one? I can,
On
The state level
state
guidance.
level guidance.
Yeah.
I think you have done a little bit more
okay.
digging over the last 2 days.
Okay, so the proposed rules or guidelines, I'm not exactly sure what they are, have come out from the state. They haven't been accepted yet, but one of the things that they're proposing is a 500-foot buffer on retail cannabis shops. And possibly, let me just double check whether it's the integrated ones as well. And so that, sorry, let me just double check. Yeah, it's retail cannabis. Shall not, it's so basically they're treating it like they're referring to the part of the statute that deals with controlled substances by schools. So it's basically 500 feet from any school property would be the restriction. Schools seem to cover, I'm trying to get a confirmation from the town attorney, but it appears that it's public and private schools that are serving kindergarten or probably pre-K at this point to 12th grade. It does not appear to cover childcare centers, but that's not clear. I mean, at least that's the state regulation that's being proposed. We did a little bit of looking at how that impacts in Brattleboro. We have St. Michael's in the downtown, which, you put a 500-foot buffer. It does take part of the municipal center part of Main Street. So a little bit north of High Street, you wouldn't be able to locate a shop there. When you look at West Brattleboro Village, because Academy School is there, 500 feet basically does, it doesn't go as far as Greenleaf Street, but it goes to kind of the South Street area. So, there are definitely retail shops would not be allowed in parts of West Brattleboro Village. Steve, you looked at the high school, correct?
Yes, so depending on whether the career center counts or not towards this definition, if it doesn't count, then we're pretty much spared all of the exit 1 Canal Street retail space. I think the buffer ends like a foot away from the property line of the Walgreens. So every commercial property on Canal Street at present would be able to have a retail shop. But if the career center did count, then the marketplace and some of the Price Chopper area is exempt.
Yeah, and I do think that the career center will count because it's a school that's under the jurisdiction of the supervisory union. And similarly, it's possible that the Canal Street School, I know it's younger grades, but I think a lot of the early education programs happen out of that Canal Street School. That could potentially be included because I think that that's got some sort of relationship to the supervisory union, or sorry, I'm using this, yeah. What do they call them? Sorry. Wyndham Southeast, yes, supervisory union, right?
Sounds right.
Sorry. Thinking about my own supervisory union. I think that, so that would take a lot of that lower part of Canal Street out. The other ones, Green Street's in a very residential neighborhood. And so is Academy School. So those are not areas that we allow retail uses anyway. So a 500-foot buffer on Green Street, actually, I didn't measure it. That could take you down to Elliott Street, but those two schools don't seem as problematic, or Hilltop Montessori either, because those are residential areas. So that's the proposed rule and kind of the impact. In Steve's memo and his presentation, he did, so what the rules, the statute says that if a town has enacted a local cannabis control board, which the select board hasn't made a decision on yet, but it appears that the local cannabis control board can then apply the zoning to, prior to issuing a permit at the local level. What Steve did in his memo was kind of look at, if we just treated a cannabis shop as a retail, as any other retail store in town, what districts could it be located in? Similarly, if it was a lab, because it gets a testing license and it's a lab, what does that look like under our existing uses? And we started there because when medical dispensaries came in, we had a lot of back and forth. We looked into, did we want to create a new use? And at that time, we just decided it's like an office, it's like a doctor's office. You go in, you got your card, whatever. So we didn't create a new use. And so, we gave a look. I can pull that up if you think that would be helpful, but to kind of figure out, where's the light industrial, where's the manufacturing allowed, where retail stores allowed. The one area that looks like we might need to give some consideration to is that the state is not considering cannabis growing or cultivators as agriculture. And so, that might be someplace we want to take a look at. Maybe we might need to create a use. If you're doing it indoors and you're in a greenhouse, we can just consider it under a greenhouse. We have that in our land use regulations. But if you're just growing, if you're cultivating on a piece of property, do we want, we might need a separate use category for that. So that's something we might need to look at. I don't really, we're still waiting for more rules and regulations. The select board hasn't discussed it in a while that I'm aware of. And so, I'd like to be ready if they do form a local cannabis control board, that we will be able to go to them with some recommendations of how the zoning would apply, whether it's, we're just going to go with what's in the zoning. And here's how we see it fitting, or whether we need to create some regulations. Some of you may recall last year, the Brattleboro Area Prevention Coalition came to talk to the Planning Commission. And at that point, the Planning Commission committed to doing some public outreach and, understanding from the public what they wanted. So I think we're getting to the point you know, we're probably gonna want to do that fairly soon, because the zoning change does take some time. With the public hearings and the warnings and all of that. Retail licenses, I think, are October of 2022. So we definitely get calls in the office, people wondering, you know, what do they need a permit for? And really, we're just telling them right now, well, you know, we don't have a permitting process. We can't issue any permits. Because we don't know what those rules are yet, and we don't have a local cannabis control board. And maybe we won't, but if we don't, then it, in my reading, we can't apply that, we cannot apply the zoning, so. So that's kind of a start.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take questions. Maybe you've all been thinking about this a little bit.
So I'm assuming that there's still, as you can see with my, there's a lot of still ironing out of regulations, zoning. From Montpelier to down here. That being said, are we looking at this year, next year, as far as knowing where these places will be, I guess, put into place as far as businesses around schools, churches, you name it, you know, places like that in the
Well,
area?
I don't know when they're gonna adopt their kind of final rules, but their recommendation is the 500 feet on a school.
Right.
They don't say anything about childcare, so assuming childcare doesn't fit in that definition. They don't talk about other sensitive uses, which could include a church or you know, something like the Boys and Girls Club where
Right.
teenagers are hanging out. But that doesn't mean, you know, I think these are out for public comment. They're taking comments. More people could weigh in. You know, Steve and I had a discussion in the office that one of the concerns with having a one-size-fits-all buffer is that it's not necessarily going to work for every town. And I actually would prefer they leave it up to the town to make those decisions. You know, especially if they have zoning and they establish a local cannabis control board. It's not necessarily the case in Brattleboro, although I think you could argue we'd love to see some development in West Brattleboro Village, and that pushes it out. So it's going to push it to, as Steve said, a more sprawl location, where you could be bringing people in, you know.
So
But I think
be like a setup like Habit Opco, like, you know, like a place like the dispensary, like they have on Putney Road, and that's similar. The way they have it set up now, they can't go by similar guidelines. It has to be tweaked a little differently, I'm assuming, on how the setup is.
like the one on Putney Road, if they wanted to do retail, so the rules have lots of security measures that need to be in place. I don't know that building would need to be, for it to go from medical to retail. I don't know that they would need to do
Oh, the
much.
crossover,
It's
right.
kind of internal stuff. We haven't seen any regulation on signage yet. I don't know if there's more. I thought there were more regulations to come out, proposed regulations. You know, we've seen information on advertising, but not strictly signage.
And how like they said the covering, I think there was part of that too, covering windows, I guess.
Yeah, Steve's presentation kind of delved into what some other states and localities have done, and, you know, creating opaque windows, and how, you know, that is not consistent with our land use regulations right now. So it's not something we'd want to see dictated by the state.
That was an issue brought up. They mentioned, I was reading up on that. Do we
Yeah.
do that?
Can I see? Yeah, Prudence.
So if the state passes the 500-foot buffer, then that's by definition, every town, we would have the buffer, and then we could choose to add additional requirements or not.
Yes, I believe so. There is a little waiver section in their proposed regulations that basically says that the board can waive regulatory requirement regarding the operations of a cannabis establishment to the extent such waiver does not conflict with other state law. if in the board's determination, such a waiver is necessary to achieve the purpose of Vermont law and does not create a danger to the public health, safety, or welfare. It's pretty broad, but I'm not sure that asking for a waiver of the, trying to get a waiver of the buffer is necessarily going to meet those. It could in a small village that, maybe that's the only place they have retail and it's been rolled out, maybe to something like that, you could ask for a waiver, but.
And then can you explain the opaque? So that is, planners generally don't like that because it,
Yeah.
it's
So
just
it
different than any
deactivates-
other retail.
Yeah, well, more so that it creates this barrier, you want kind of that transparency between the street and the store.
Sidewalk in the store.
Yeah,
especially.
sidewalk in a store, thanks, so specifically in the downtown, I mean, the one place that has done it creatively is Planned Parenthood on High Street. They
Mhm.
actually built in a recessed kind of high knee wall or whatever you want to call it. But they've taken a storefront and they've created kind of a barrier there, so you're not seeing the clients, the patients in there. But typically what's done is, they kind of cross the windows or they do whatever, and it just, to be more walkable and stuff, you need the transparency.
I think the way they have their windows set up compared to the way the windows are set up at the dispensary, slightly different because you still have a view in some aspect, but this would be more discreet.
Yeah.
At the dispensary.
So if folks want to see what it looks like in Massachusetts, where some of these stores have had transparent facades where they've infilled in a downtown location, there's one from East Hampton. Yeah, that one. And so they've taken what was an opaque window in a downtown storefront, which is the kind of commercial real estate that we really like as planners, but they've deactivated that storefront for its visual interest because of state law. So that's really just not ideal. One idea that I had was that they might want to, or we might want to get out ahead of that if that does become a state requirement in Vermont, to require them to use the windows for some sort of legal storefront display, but have an opaque barrier behind that so that it still maintains some sort of visual interest. So that's the kind of fine-grained design guideline that we might want to be considering as that becomes more clear. But I think it's still the case that that's not something that's being included in the regulations.
We haven't seen it yet, yeah. And I'm not sure if in the medical dispensaries it's required. You're saying it exists on it, so it might be.
Right.
But it was also a bank beforehand. So they may
That's
have-
right. That's true.
Later in this presentation, there are a few that have just blank walls, which is also something that's contrary to our, well, depending on length, generally contrary to our existing design regulations like this one. And then further down, there's a purpose-built one that has semi-transparent windows, which I think is a bit more successful in Springfield. It's really distinctive, so you probably see it.
This is inside.
Yeah. So this one is semi-frosted. They've got, I haven't been to this location, but it's got something that you can see up front. So that's a little bit better as it goes for walking by.
Oh.
This
But
is
it's
next
got
to
that
the-
high wall though.
Yeah,
too.
and then this is by the highway, so it's not really walkable anyways, but still.
Yeah.
Huh.
I've got a question to maybe help frame the conversation. I'm wondering if there's aspects on this zoning and land use regs of cannabis that we can really focus on now that we are pretty confident won't be subject to just some upheaval and change of rules or development of rules by the state. I mean, are there aspects that we can safely start moving forward on and at least tentatively deciding as a commission?
Yes.
Instead of some of these things which are just
Right,
who knows
right.
which way they'll go at this point.
So I think that we need to get comfortable with the existing land use regulations and, begin talking about it as a store is a store is a store.
Mhm.
Does it work for us? Do we want to recommend that that's the approach? Or, if we've committed to some sort of outreach, I could see a presentation to the public. And, we could start the presentation from there. I would rather not it be a free-for-all. I'd rather say, okay, I'd rather for us to come up with a strategy and then get the public's input on it.
Mhm.
We could start it from a buffers conversation. We know that it's at least 500 on schools. Are there other uses that we think should have a buffer on it? Doran's got a hand up.
Oh, darn.
Sorry, no,
No.
I didn't mean to interrupt if you were in full swing. I can throw my comment at the end too.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I was gonna ask like what other, obviously if there's the 500, foot buffer, what other buffers are needed in terms of, I mean, like even the kind of the frosted window is a bit silly. If you've ever looked into a pot shop, it's just like jars and boxes. It's not like, you more often than not, they don't have, whole pot plants growing in the shop. It just looks like a regular old, relatively boring shop with some jars and boxes. So it's like, that seems a little kind of, I don't really quite understand that element. Or I just don't know, because generally you need to have like good forms of ID to be able to purchase anything in a pot shop. And they also have relatively usually tight restrictions on how many people can be in at a time. Or some of them do as well. So I just don't know what other types of restrictions would really be needed. Like the shop as a shop makes kind of the most sense to me. But then again, I thought pot should have been legalized, years ago. So at least in my view of it.
Yeah, Prudence.
Yes, I don't agree that a shop is a shop, or I would speak against that, I guess, partly from being involved with public health for 5 years and understanding more about just more about it's a substance. I mean, I don't want to be hypocritical, and I'm not anti-pot at all, but it's really not a good thing. It's not good for young brains, just like alcohol isn't. It's not a wellness item. If you use it and drive, you're driving while you're impaired, so it's, I guess I would like to see a buffer around the Boys and Girls Club too. I'm glad that the buffer doesn't include daycare. I think that would be way too restrictive, daycare centers. And I don't know about a 500-foot buffer, but it sounds like it might be out of our hands. That sounds like it might be bigger than is necessary. But I guess personally, I'd like to see a buffer around schools, and I would like us to have a buffer around the Boys and Girls Club, a small one at least. Like I took some comfort in when the CBD shop owner said that he wouldn't dispense marijuana from that location because he felt like it was inappropriate being right across the street from a big teenage hangout, an important social service organization in town that is focused on teens.
I like to see that at least by Turning Point as well too, because Sandra Holloway mentioned that as well also, because you're doing people recovery. So that being said, what were your thoughts on that as well also, Bruce? Because now if you're thinking the Boys and Girls Club, you have people in recovery down on that street too.
Yeah, I guess I'm less concerned about adults. But I'm more concerned about, kind of under 18 age. And I mean, I don't know. I was sort of surprised actually that we didn't have any restrictions on where alcohol could be sold, but we don't. I guess it's okay. I mean, Walgreens sells wine and maybe beer, and they're pretty close to the high school. And that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, cannabis, not alcohol, but.
I think, yeah, and point taken, cannabis, every drug's different from every other drug, but I think just as a little review, it might be useful for people to know, because, alcohol is analogous in some ways, right? Compared to the scheme of other uses, right? At least in the sense that, it's something for adults only. It's legally, it's something that the licenses and where alcohol can be sold are, whether that's for retail or consumption, is at the discretion of the liquor commissioners, which is the select board in this town. And so,
And the state.
and the state. And likewise with cannabis, it's going to be the ultimate decision of where cannabis can be sold in town is going to be the cannabis control, or no, sorry, either the select board, or if the select board decides to delegate that to someone else. But since they haven't with alcohol, my guess is they'll retain that power themselves. And in our zoning, the only thing that it says for alcohol is, as far as retail goes, it's not mentioned once. It's just lumped in under shop or store. So it depends, shop/store, it's the same thing. So as you go through the zones, as staff compiled, that's either permitted, conditional, or not allowed, and vary it in each zone. And then the other two things for alcohol is bar/drinking place. So are we going to have consumption lounges or whatever you call them for cannabis?
At this time, no.
Is that the state's
The
not
state
allowing
is
that?
not allowing it at this
I
time.
wondered that. Okay, so that's not even a possibility at this point. Okay. And then the last thing with alcohol, if we're to use that analogy, is instead of just instead of just an alcohol like bottling or fermenting place being called manufacturing, it's called a beverage products manufacturing. So a separate use category was created in that case. I don't know why, but it was. So just to, if maybe everyone knew all those already, but just to give some, I think alcohol is a good analogy, and my proclivity would be just to keep the cannabis zone, land use regs as simple or simpler than it is for alcohol, and just leave the location decision up to the, whatever it's going to be called at the town level,
The local cannabis control.
the local cannabis control board who issues licenses.
That'd be state, correct?
So if the select board decides to have a local cannabis control board, it would go through them first and then go on to the state, just like liquor licenses.
Just like liquor.
Yeah.
And I totally understand what Bruce was saying with the younger gen, but
Yeah,
I just,
oh, me
I didn't
too,
want
but-
it to be, an exclusive with the people that are going through recovery.
Yeah.
Because I have to respect that as well also
Yeah.
with people. I myself was
Yeah.
going through recovery as well.
Yeah.
So I can understand the implications and the impact that it has on a lot of people that live in this town that are dealing with addiction. And for some of us, we have control, and others, they
Yeah.
have this.
Yeah.
And I think in marginalized areas and low income areas, we have to take that in consideration as well too.
Yeah.
That's-
Well, if we're, in my opinion, is if we're going to consider that for cannabis, we should consider the buffers for alcohol as well. And we should look and see, if that helps people, and if studies have been done and stuff.
Well, like Prudence says, they have it in Walgreens that it, and
Yeah,
then
well,
we're getting more microbreweries or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
So
Steve,
I think it might be worth bringing up, and it's possible that this doesn't apply because of the way that they've kind of done gymnastics to make this under a different statute seemingly. But is it worth discussing the time, place, manner situation and how that could open up a gigantic Pandora's box of regulatory research for the board here?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that too, because I was thinking the other somewhat similar is kind of the adult entertainment uses. But Steve, you did more research. Do you want to talk about the time, place, manner on that? But I mean, that's basically a US Supreme Court case
Yeah.
that acknowledged that there is harm that if a municipality can prove that there's kind of harm and that kind of thing coming from the adult entertainment, then you can put additional buffers on it. I'm not sure that you can make that link with the alcohol. So go ahead, why don't you speak to it, Steve?
So essentially, I think the case was called Renton versus Playtime Theaters, 1981 or 2, if anyone wants to read the case law afterwards. But essentially the finding was that they could argue that there were ancillary effects of adult businesses that had negative impacts on the local area, and that there was some sort of reasonable government nexus to actually preventing those from occurring in a specific area. However, it requires you to prove that with research. And I believe it requires you to treat every conceivable adult use equally in that regard. If you're going to regulate one, that you need to regulate them all in a similar fashion, I believe is the way that the court precedent has come down. So typically it's sort of a dichotomy of a lot of regulation, which does leave you liable to potential lawsuit or a sort of laissez-faire approach. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that was a fairly controversial case. It was definitely 5-4 with a lot of reservations from the 4. So it's not necessarily something that's been challenged since. And when cannabis becomes legal federally in the future, as a lot of us I think assume may happen, that probably would be reopened. And so it's just worth considering the liability that we might be taking on to get into that sort of regulation. If the state gives us something to do that preempts us, then we just have to do that. But to add on locally is something that has consequences to consider.
So that'd be something revisited if federal, you're saying?
Yeah. Well, the court case could be if the federal laws on cannabis change.
Seeing as it's 7:45, what should be our path forward here? People have suggestions or strategy or staff, or I mean, there's definitely an unlimited amount of conversation and discussion and brainstorming we can do, but what's our, I mean, there's.
So I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing interest in buffers. I support what Steve just told you, but we could do some more research on that and maybe talk to our town attorney and the league and see. So we could do a little research on that. I'm also, I heard, concern about the public health perspective. We can try to pull some research on effects on youth, not usage, but more of, I don't know, like, I don't know if we can find whether or not there's any impacts of having stores around, that kind of thing.
So there was I know Massachusetts had, when I was doing some research, there was an alcohol specific compliance report, basically to determine how well they were actually keeping sales to minors from happening over several years. I don't know that that's been done on cannabis, but I can try to find that in any states to reassure that compliance is happening or determine whether compliance is happening at rates that are high enough that folks could feel comfortable that that's not something that youth could access. If that sounds relevant to the concern with what buffers are intended to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So you guys in the report showed to some extent what the rollout of these different types of commercial cannabis would look like with our current zoning, but is there a more kind of like semi-finalized draft that can be produced?
Yeah,
So
I
that way,
think,
so that way
yeah,
then
we
we
could-
can actually like see what it's might look like and be like, oh no, we want it stricter than that, or what about this, or this is missing, or this is too strict.
Yeah, we
or
can put it in a different format and kind of,
closer to the
yeah,
in final things. Okay.
yeah.
So you want to put in there like how it impacts certain areas?
Well, I mean, just like when you look in the land use regs,
Mhm.
right? Because we're gonna have to do something to our land use regs
Mhm.
to some extent to
Right.
comply with this, full legalization
Ah.
in the state. So I think what I'm requesting is that staff, make some sort of representation of an amendment to our land use regs, or a series of amendments based off what they've heard, based off the reasonable possibilities. Like new use categories if need be, and permitted in certain areas and not in others, and possible buffers. And then, so that's what we've done with in previous land use regs in the past, either a planning commission member, comes up with a proposed draft, or staff does, and then it comes to the meeting, and then we say, yeah, we like it, or, well, maybe, I don't like where that one's going. Can we modify that? And then we don't necessarily every single word, I'll vote on every single word of the amendment, but we kind of just feel good about, make changes and hopefully feel good about a final version. But so maybe
Yeah,
we can kind of
start
get
that.
yeah,
Yeah, it'll be iterative, and it's
Exactly,
gonna allow you to react to something, and yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So this falls on the zoning tax work, so all this stuff that they're gonna get incentives and everything that's coming down the pipeline. So
I don't
I
know
don't know
anything
that there's
about
gonna be incentives. There's gonna be a lot of taxation.
Well, they could, some of them
Oh,
could,
yeah.
And
some of them
licensing
could
fees.
possibly apply to the town's tax stabilization for commercial.
And where the
Sure.
money of those taxes are gonna be, we're not inclined to know how that's gonna be allocated.
No, that's being discussed at the state level.
Okay,
It's pretty much all going to the state,
right.
but
Depends on-
yeah.
So the town has.
Yeah, Dan.
In addition to buffers, if I could just add in there, one thing that jumped out to me from the case studies, I believe, in the memo that Steve put together, neighborhood level opt-out as are we listing what we're gonna be considering as far as, well, I just wanted to add that one in there. And the other one is, distributing licenses geographically. For example, you don't want, one street that has 3 shops on it, right? So once one is there, you've kind of filled your quota. I just wanted to add that to the
Yeah.
discussion. That was from the Chicago example.
I think some states have targeted density, and they have a certain number of licenses and they distribute them in that way. I don't know that that happens at the local level as much as the state level.
yeah.
Is it like a lottery or something? No.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else that's like that in our land use. regs.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, it seems like these are, since Steve put together Arizona and Illinois examples, these are all local, differences in Illinois, for example. But I think it's worth thinking about, the impact on a neighborhood, wherever it is, that if you were to have 2 or more, that's where you start getting a little bit more of a disproportionate impact kind of situation. If your zones started to edge out every other neighborhood, and you had one zone where it's allowed, and then you have a whole, I don't know, a whole block or whatever,
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do some more research into that. I'm not aware of zoning controls that allow you to do it by density other than adult entertainment, which, I think there you can. The other thing is where Dylan's rural state, I don't know what Illinois or those other states are. They might have local control, they more home rule than we have. So if it's not authorized by the state, we're not going to be allowed to do it.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
But the liquor board that maybe the select board may be able to do something like that. Oh, not
I
necessarily.
don't, I
Yeah,
don't
well, we don't
think
know.
so under
I
Dylan's
thought
rule
they
if
could do-
it's
oh,
not
okay.
empowered,
Okay,
but be wrong.
okay.
Steve had
Yeah.
something
So,
to add.
yeah, just to speak to that particular concern, about too many shops in one particular area causing disproportionate impact. I would say, from watching the Massachusetts example play out, if anything, it was sort of the opposite of that at the beginning. There was seemingly a artificially low number of licenses issued at the beginning in Massachusetts, which led to an excessive amount of car and pedestrian traffic at the very few number of shops that were allowed. So they needed to have police detail directing traffic through Northampton and Spencer, Mass, for example, for months at least. And so I think allowing for just the natural market to decide what density is tenable might actually, in the case of Massachusetts, which definitely relaxed its license number restrictions in response to that, that might be something that can work itself out. But it's totally appropriate to consider research into that for our cases as well.
Prudence, yep.
I
Oh.
just wanted to say, I agree with Sue in terms of public outreach, that I think, you know, the commission needs to have recommendations to share with the public rather than just sort of an open, what do you think? Because yeah, it'll be a free for all, and you know, there's lots of different opinions and lots of different valid opinions. And the other thing I wanted to say is if there's data about use, you know, about some of these issues and youth use, that would be great to have. You know, I mean, if it turns out that it doesn't make any difference, that youth can access it if they want it, and none of this matters in terms of you know, people using it before legal age, you know, that would just be really interesting to know too, and important to know.
Mhm.
So I guess my last synopsis on that, being it for medicinal purposes for people, I think that's a big factor that we should consider. A lot of people using it for not just for whatever use out there for public consumption, whatever. I think we're looking at more for people in the municipal part because it's needed. In that aspect too, I don't know if that's something to factor in versus recreational, you know what I mean? Does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, and I guess that's when we can consider buffers for medicinal, or I think your argument is that we shouldn't because it's more important, or we could allow medicinal to be permitted in more zones than we do retail. So yeah, I mean, all these different categories have, you know, medicinal or manufacturing or labs or or retail to the public have different implications. And so we will apply different land use regs to them, most likely.
So I think the medicinal falls under the integrated license. I'll have to look this up to verify it. And that is one area where the state is only going to have 5 integrated licenses in the state. So I think that the medicinal is not necessarily being rolled into all these regulations because they kind of exist. But those medicinal shops could become, you know, they fall under the integrated. They could then have a retail portion to it. They could be both.
Right.
They could also do their own testing and stuff. So we'll report back on the medicinal.
Oh, okay. Well, it's almost 8, but I feel, do we feel like we want to start make some headway on this infill housing study? Yeah, Prudence and Dan are nodding, I'm nodding. Okay, all right, so staff prepared. Anyway, but let me just jump back to the commercial cannabis real quick. So next time we see that, we're going to see some sort of draft sort of land use reg amendment sort of language, and then that's something we can actually react to because it's on the way to a final product. Okay. I saw some nods from staff. Great.
Yeah.
So with the infill housing study, yeah, they prepared this for us. If you'll recall, we talked a little bit about it at two meetings ago, I think it was, about what like a neighborhood survey, character survey might look like. So I think these background docs they gave us flesh that out a bit more, and actually,
Yeah,
at least,
and
yeah.
we've got kind of there's a lot of slides in this deck, but Steve knows how to cut it back, so
Mhm.
we'll touch
Yeah,
on it.
this was meant to be adaptable to how much time we have or want to spend. It's very much a choose your own adventure.
Yeah. Well, I think should we give it 15 to 8:15? Cut off the meeting at 8:15. Just kind of see some nods or shakes if yeah. Okay.
Okay. Steve, just tell me when to move the
Okay,
slides.
sure. So the main purpose of developing this for the commission was to serve as sort of a tutorial that could be revisited to make sure that everybody was comfortable with doing desktop surveys of our built form. And this is meant to build directly into the character survey forms that we saw at our last meeting. Or was that October?
October, I think.
Okay. So those should still be available on the drive if folks want to see them. I believe there's a screenshot of the form later in this particular presentation. So the major resources that are at our disposal to do the desktop portion of this are the maps online, which you're seeing a screenshot of here. This is a fairly rich GIS-based service that we have access to that allows us to see parcel data, zoning, permit data, and other things. And this combined with Google Street View and our land use ordinance allows us to learn quite a lot about the existing character of Brattleboro. So we can move on to the next slide. So this is a picture of maps online where the zoning district layer is turned on. That will allow you to be able to determine which zoning district a particular parcel is in, which you can then reference the zoning ordinance to understand the dimensional characteristics that are allowable under that particular district. And so comparing what is there with what's allowable gives you, in essence, a gap where infill might be possible. And so that is sort of the deliverable that we're moving towards through this particular process. So some of the particular layers that we'll be able to use through this are water, sewer, parcel lot lines, as well as the dimensions and area, flood maps, the zoning districts. And so all of those things together will help us come up with that sort of master map of what the best parcels for infill are that we had discussed in a few previous meetings. There's also a measurement tool that I've called out here on the bottom of the screen that you can use to determine distances from particular lot lines, which will be helpful in surveying where there are areas that infill can be developed where it doesn't currently exist. And so combining that with Google Street View allows for a more holistic understanding of sort of the bird's eye view top down, as we just went through, of where the lot lines are and where infill might be developable. But then Street View gives you an idea of the architectural form of what's on the ground, allowing you to see different streets in town without having to actually physically go there, which is of course something we're also going to be pursuing. So Street View is also a historical database, I think from 2007 to the present. So you can see some iterative change in the character of the built form over time, depending on how many times they pass through a particular location. And so using the land use regulations in combination with those two tools, we can determine sort of which forms of infill housing might be appropriate for which places. And in combining the existing built form with what the potential development envelope of each of our zoning districts are, will give us a better sense of what the obstacles and opportunities in different parts of Brattleboro are for each potential type of infill housing. So we're mostly going to be looking at the dimensional standards, which you can see in the table on the left-hand side under 226.c. But each particular zoning district in the land use ordinance will have its own dimensional standards, and a helpful visual tool as well is the drawing on the bottom right-hand corner. Most of our zoning designations have a drawn example of how dimensional form is applied for your viewing.
Yeah. Put on the
I didn't even.
laser pointer and
Oh,
now
it's like
I.
a laser.
Yeah.
You hit the arrow button?
Yeah, I got it. I got it.
Oh, sorry.
That's pretty cool.
So ultimately, we're going to be filling out this character survey form, and that's going to give us some great data on what the actual on the ground layout of our community is. And so developing out of this particular character survey is a better understanding of where infill might be possible in the town. So this survey or this presentation was developed to get the creative juices flowing on how to think about the built environment and what we might be seeing when we look at the transportation network or architectural form, especially when we're walking around town. I would imagine that we don't have time to really go into that now. But if anyone's interested, I would certainly encourage going through that. This, I've used a context from Texas where I was living prior to moving here, just to give us a example that we're completely unfamiliar with so that we don't bring any preconceptual baggage, and we can just see the pure forms for what they are. But if anyone wants on their own time to go through this presentation to get a better understanding sort of a few periods of planning development history in the US. As I mentioned in the memo that y'all might have seen, Brattleboro has a little bit less of the later suburban style developments, which is actually arguably a good thing. So it's a little bit more subtle to see, but I still think that learning what these forms look like will be helpful for us to understand what we're seeing when we walk around the community soon. And I've also included a passage from the Field Guide on American Houses, I think is the title, which is what this concept was pulled out of. She does a much better job than this, and that's not at all required reading, but it's fascinating, and I think y'all will like it. So I can answer questions if anyone wants.
That was an excellent presentation, I must say. Very clear.
A couple questions. Maybe you can't show it now, but you said that Maps Online allows you to see the water and sewer network. I couldn't figure out how to do that.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And
So
I assume you meant it's in the left column where the zoning is, and I didn't see it in there.
if it's something that's only viewable through particular permissions, I can make sure to speak with Brian to get that
Okay.
enabled for us.
Yeah,
suspect that may be
Dan
it.
had a question on here. Can we send the link to Maps Online? The one that sits on the main website doesn't have all the layers that
Oh,
we
okay.
have access to, but Brian said he will give permissions for this project, so.
Oh, so
So-
Google Map has that capability, or you have to pay extra?
So Maps Online, the first tool that was shown, has layers that you can turn on to show you particular data sets about the town. And so just like the zoning designations, which I do think the public can access at the present, it's through that layers tab, and then it's you'll tick the box.
It's
I
not,
have it
it's
up
not
right
the
now.
assessor's department's webpage. Because it shows parcels presumably as the
Yeah.
main, as the main value to it.
You have to navigate in there to get in to find it? Okay.
Yeah, they have links on the assessor's page.
I'm trying to, I thought I had it up for you all to take a quick look at, but
Yeah,
for some reason it's
Mhm.
not.
And then Steve, this image here of the maps, which you can get off of, and then all the ones after where you show over time with the automobile development.
Mhm.
Well, it seemed like one common theme was the streets get curvier. And have like, and so is the idea with that pedestrians matter less as time goes on in the dominance of the automobile. And
Yeah.
as a result, the grid was the best form for pedestrians.
Mhm.
And the linear thing is just kind of an aesthetic for driving. And distance kind of doesn't matter when you're sitting comfortably in a fast vehicle, so they can make okay.
Right, yeah, that was definitely, I would say, the idea that transportation technology is generative of land use decisions is an overarching theme.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
definitely
convincing.
popular viewpoint that you've just expressed, that's a pretty that's a pretty well held view on why those changes happen.
I see.
I would say the sort of wonky answer is, I think the Olmsted designs of the early suburban era
Mhm.
sort of had the curvilinear forms for the first time. They came out of English landscape design tradition, and so that sort of just became
Yeah.
its own suburban design tradition that continues to the
Right.
present, I would
And-
assume.
Yeah, and if there wasn't the automobile, people maybe would have been so outraged at just how hard it was to get from point A to point B with that form. But since there was cars, they could do that, and there wouldn't be much upset at it.
Sure, yeah, I would
Well, I'm
say,
Guessing reasonably.
a straight line between 2 points is the most efficient
Right.
way to travel, assuming a flat plane.
Yeah.
So yes, curved street grids are generally less efficient for pedestrian travel.
Mhm.
Although I'm sure people in Boston are fond of their random web of streets that's
Right.
quite walkable as
Yeah.
well.
But the spans are so short there that it kind of
Yeah, block length
adjusts for it a bit.
block length is a great
Yeah.
indicator of walkability as well, not just
Mm-hmm.
rectilinear.
So how often you said they update that that particular map? Is it,
The street view or?
yeah, the street views? I mean, because we know landmass changes, streets change constantly, like if you're driving, sometimes they're doing construction or rerouting and all that, that it's not always accurate.
Yeah, they're not done that frequently where they're
Okay.
gonna pick up a construction project unless you just happen to hit the Google car driving around
And that's where.
at that time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but every couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we can suggest changes too. I've done that on Google Maps. They accept them sometimes.
Oh,
There doesn't really seem to be a publicly available rhyme or reason to where they go and why. I
Yeah.
think Chesterfield hasn't been re-updated since 2007, parts of Chesterfield at least. Anything 2012 and on is really high vis or high res, so it's kind of indistinguishable from then till now. You can get a really good idea of what you're looking at, whereas previously before 2009, it's really grainy and
Yeah.
that's not very useful. But all of Brattleboro that we're going to be looking at should be available in high res. And if it isn't, then we can go.
well, the satellite view also is a little bit more accurate than versus the Google
I can also get LiDAR data available to folks if we decide that that's useful. I don't think it necessarily will be helpful, but
Yeah,
we have 2021 LiDAR flyovers.
I think that would be like the next level. Once we identify some sites, it would make sense. It's too, I think the files are too large. I don't think it would work for most. but-
So so the next step for this?
So is there anybody that's interested in, who's got a little bit of time during the workday, or the weekday, 9 to 5 hours that wants to test this out? Actually, it'd probably be 9 to 3 or something like that.
I could do
because
an
of
office
daylight.
hour as well if anyone wants a tutorial in person. I think
Yeah, so
that's-
Steve is willing to go out in public or, have an office hour. If somebody wants to drop by and pick a neighborhood and you guys could kind of walk through it to get comfortable with it.
Weather permitting.
So, you could reach out to Steve or we'll reach out and see if you've got time. And if you don't have time, we understand.
So the structure here is that people can elect to do it solely digitally through what you presented, or do it in person, or a hybrid of the two.
I
Right.
think we could get as much of either or both as we possibly can.
Right. Okay.
Interest and time permitting.
I think even if you go in person, I think you still need to look at the digital tools. And
Right.
Steve's presentation got into, where are the parcel lines? So, that might prohibit actually having infill development on the parcel if the house is smack dab in the middle and there's,
Right.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. That reminds me that was like the actual point of all of the stuff that I did and not just pure interest. But so essentially we were thinking that some of the, I always forget the name of these streets. What's an example of one of the?
Stockwell,
Clark.
Yes.
Stockwell Drive.
Stockwell.
Some of the later subdivisions.
Some of these suburban cul-de-sac type subdivisions in West Brat have a later development pattern that I touch on a little bit, where the house is smack in the middle of a rectangular, very close to square or even perfectly square lot, which poses significantly more challenge for typical infill types, I would say, than some of the easier, more frequent infill types that you see in traditional streetcar suburb type homes that have a backyard with a carriage house that could just become an ADU. So getting a sense of where the parcel lines are could help us know, is there a space that's within the minimum setbacks that you could build something here. I think that the biggest challenge we're going to encounter are those places. But there could be an infill type that hasn't really been thought of yet that we could suddenly come up with. You never know. So it's worth canvassing that area as well, probably.
I mean, we should just contact you guys on our own, or I mean, maybe you guys
Want a
should,
calendar?
maybe you guys
Yeah.
should act as teachers and give us assignments, or.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we can. I mean, is anybody interested in, or, if you want to just raise your hands now, we can get in touch with you. If you're going to have time in the next couple of weeks. I see Dan, Tom, Gary, excellent, Prudence, we'll reach out to you. I know, Doran, you had said December is kind of busy for you.
Yeah, I'm actually
So-
currently building a tiny house with my partner, and we're trying to get the roof on before the snow comes. So
Excellent. All right.
Cool.
Yeah.
in January, I may have a bit more time and might be able to help out then.
So if you all think about, a neighborhood that you might want to, a block that you want to do, we'll be in touch to either, set up a time to go out with you, or if you want to come into the office, or give you an assignment.
Badges.
We don't have badges. We also do not have badges as town employees, so,
When we go to these areas like, ooh,
no, you won't want to go on somebody's property. I'm not
No.
telling you to do that.
that's not a lesson.
Just walk on the sidewalk.
Yeah, for the public that's listening, don't worry. We're coming no closer than the sidewalks, if at all.
So that's how we'll move forward.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be
great. Let's wrap it up. I won't say having no other business because we do, but we're gonna table it. So I'll entertain a motion. Yeah, Dan, or something else. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. I know this, we've gone over time, but on Maps Online, is there a file or some data on the age of, or when the structure was built in each lot?
Not
Or
on Maps Online. We can give you another one. There is on the assessor's page, they have property cards and you can get the date off of that.
but that's not
So
mapped.
we can add that into our resources.
Okay. And then you mentioned that Brian would give us access to other layers. Is that like we'd have to log in or something like that? Or do you mean there are other layers
think-
that we can find somehow?
No, so we have a Maps Online version that we use in the office, and I think he might be able to, whether we send the link, I'll have to check in and get
Okay.
back to you. I don't know that I don't think you need to sign in. But I'm not sure. Maps Online confuses me. He's the expert.
Yeah, whether he makes a login for you guys or makes everything available to everyone for a short time.
Yeah.
Okay.
He'll make sure that, I'll talk to him and make sure that you can access what you need to.
So it'll just be for this particular project and then.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Then we have to pick, I don't know if you're doing a calendar of what days are availabilities.
We'll figure that out. Yeah. Find out.
If you're on Outlook, I can share my calendar.
Mhm.
Perfect, yeah, because I got a lot coming up this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A motion to adjourn,
I motion that we adjourn.
seconded from anyone? Prudence, all right, we're adjourned.